Hello. Hi, Andrew. Hi, Louise.
Hi. I'm just responding to your email, Julian.
Oh, about the thing
Yeah.
from Joe Heck.
Yeah, and I'm like, Joe, you know me. Why didn't you reach out to me? I just said, by the way, RexFairy, the thing you've been using for a couple of years, everything that it supports is CSI ready because we created a bridge. I didn't see the container. I mean, you know what? I need to change my settings on the group. I set it to only send me a digest, and I just didn't see it in the digest, a daily digest.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
Got
my
it.
bad. Hey, I logged on to the biweekly link, and it wasn't that no one was there, but I wasn't sure because no one tends to show up until right at the time. So
Right. Yeah. Let me see if I can figure out how to share this document without sharing my entire screen, which is maybe too big. Let's see.
I know it's possible in Hangouts just to share an app.
You can do it in. It puts a little green border on the app.
Also, if it's a Google Doc, wouldn't it be easier just to paste the link?
Oh yeah. Well, that's already in the invite.
Okay, well then I can just open it too.
Yeah, and you guys should feel free to type in here while we're talking. I don't know if we're going to get anyone else.
I don't know. Let me make sure my colleagues saw it. You know, what annoys me about Zoom is until somebody shares their screen, it doesn't go full screen automatically. And then when you share your screen, it goes full screen on mine. And all of a sudden, I can't access anything until I go exit. But I said, why should your action prompt my application to go full screen?
Yeah, yes, that is annoying. I think we're using it because it can record stuff. And
Oh, no, absolutely. I wasn't disparaging Zoom so much as that one little thing about it is just...
Yeah, and it's not quite as annoying as WebEx, which
WebEx is awful.
I think what we still have is our standard Dell EMC
Yeah, no
conferencing
one
offering.
uses it on our team. We use Hangout.
It's a setting on Zoom. You can say it's called maximize. Oh wait,
Is that?
I'm sorry. Ignore what I said. I have it unchecked, and it still did it for me. All right, just ignore what I said.
No, it's fine.
Is that G?
It is.
Joined?
Yeah. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hi, G. So we know Saad's not going to make it because this was a conflict for him.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone else is, if we're waiting on anyone else.
On the heck with them. Tooling is exciting. Can't you tell by my voice? No, I actually really do love tooling and processes.
Yeah. So, yeah, well, us two, we're kind of all about testing in Cloud Foundry.
Yeah.
So what would you like to do?
I'd say probably we could just get rolling. It's 11:05, so
yeah, let's
move forward.
Someone
else wants to go.
This is being recorded. Yeah.
Sounds good.
So I guess I wanted to just start with a kind of discussion of what we think the goals of a test suite in the spec repo should be and what the anti-goals should be. And so I just put my opinions in here kind of loosely, but if other people have other things that they think ought to be goals, then please feel free to just add them.
Yeah. Did you? I don't. It doesn't look like you referenced the ones from the GitHub discussion. So I asked the couple of questions that you answered. I think one of them was, should this be able to be run locally? And I think your answer was yes. So it's not just something that should be able to execute on the CI platform. So it should. Do you still believe that? If you do, I would put it here.
Yeah. Right. I think that's a good point.
Because what storage plugin could be launched there may not be the same as launched locally.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think actually that's kind of critical. Because like if I'm making a plugin I don't want to. There isn't a way for me to get the CI system to go talk to my plugin necessarily, right? So
Yeah, I think this should
would
be
also
more like a driver-like thing. Like
Can we?
I don't think we can test in our CI for storage plugins. Like,
you can. I do it today. There's no reason you can't.
but
So,
what, for example, if you need like iSCSI, like I don't have iSCSI.
Oh no, when you said your CI, I thought you meant the spec repo. We're talking about the spec repo.
right.
Okay, but we need to set up iSCSI in order to test iSCSI or EBS.
No, that we're not testing every possible storage platform. We're testing the spec. And so, yeah, we're not going to test iSCSI because that's a particular storage platform. We would use something like, I'm going to reference my own here, of course, but a mock plugin that's in memory to validate that, if it's a client or any other helper utilities, that the right behaviors are occurring and are expected.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I actually use. Is thank you.
Or a virtual file system one. The reason I didn't nominate the virtual file system one that I created, I know you looked at it once upon a time. It's the same reason that the build process and spec doesn't currently use Docker to do anything, because Travis requires sudo privileges, and that requires a full VM stack to either use Docker or to do bind mounts. And the VFS plugin that I wrote uses bind mounts. And for quick builds, you want to try to avoid their VM platform as much as possible.
Yeah.
I use it occasionally because I have to, but
we use it at Portworx as you do with Docker services. It's pretty nice.
No, we use it when we have to, but a queue time to get a VM on Travis is way longer than getting a container on Travis.
Yeah, that's true.
So Andrew, I have one clarification question. You guys mentioned mock. So basically, like, you guys write a mock CSI plugin that does some basic stuff, and there's something that verifies that mock plugin. Am I understand correctly?
Yes.
So
Go CSI does. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we've got essentially three versions of the same thing. And that comes in two parts, right? One is the actual certification, I should stop calling it certification. The sanity test suite, which is essentially going to take a plugin through some set of tests. In our case, it's just Happy Path, but
yeah,
I guess we could decide about what we want to do about negative test cases, and
then
that has to run against something in order to make sure that the cert suite works. So I think we all have some version of a mock plugin.
And the reason I haven't done an external test the way you have, mine's run Magento integration test against the head of mock. The reason I didn't do what you did, I thought about doing what you did, but just standing up the storage platforms is such a task in and of itself that I didn't expect to, at least myself, need to run any type of validation against anything other than mock, simply because, one, verification to local file system code would be something that could be storage platform dependent anyway, and two, again, it's a variable, that the storage platform. So our tests are run via Genco against the mock. It just stands up the mock server and runs all of the tests against the CSI spec.
Can I propose a model for the meeting?
Yeah.
Because it's already 10
Sure.
minutes. That each one of us has already some idea and some goals, right, and some code. Can we just take 5 minutes max of each one of us and show what we have so that the others know? And then that will give us a much better foundation to what we need to do from here on.
Well, I've used Julian's. It's really nice.
I haven't. So do you mind just showing just 5 minutes of what you have?
Sure, absolutely. Let me see here.
But while he's doing that, I think G touched upon something that I think that we can talk about pretty quickly. I just don't think that we're going to be doing or able to do something that tests something like iSCSI or NFS. If the point to run the sanity test could do it if you want to run it locally against that, but I'm specifically thinking for what is automated at this point, and I don't see a way around using something like a virtual file system implementation or a mock implementation of an SP.
Well, I just, before we start getting into that's more in the details of things, I want to just make sure that we're talking about the big picture of what we wanted to do. And that's why I want to see because each one of us took a different road, and I want to see if we all ended up at the same place. So.
Yeah. So looking at, I've looked at both of yours, and this is, I think it's very similar to the CSI sanity test. In fact, all of the identity service stuff in here is just shamelessly lifted from your test suite, which we sort of rationalized was okay because it's all going to the same place. Yeah. Because we hadn't written any identity tests. But essentially, this is a Ginkgo test suite, and it starts out with a kind of a top-level getting of capabilities so that it knows what it's testing, so it can decide, like, ooh, should I call create or not? The other wrinkle in here is that we expect there to be a fixture in the local file system somewhere defined by an environment variable that will tell the test suite, like, where to find the endpoints for the controller node service and what the payload should look like to create something. Mm-hmm. The idea being, like, well, we can't really predict what a correct create call should look like, so the data payload has to be defined
what do you mean by create?
So when you're creating a volume, so controller create volume, right? That takes a package of options, and that package of options is going to be plugin specific.
The parameters section.
Yeah. So we can't make any assumptions that someone else's plugin is gonna be okay with us doing a bare create with no options. So we have to give them some affordance to write, like, oh, here's a working set of options that should cause my plugin to successfully create a volume.
Okay. That's why I think that there are two different conversations occurring here. There's having a tool that can be used to validate any CSI storage plugin implementation and has some type of mutable options up front that they can use to say, okay, here's my typical types of inputs and what I expect. And then there's the automated fashion too. And I suppose they could possibly be the same thing, but I think they're also two different solutions.
Yeah, well, I guess I see these as the same solution. It's just, so essentially we desire to have, for any given version of the spec, we desire to have a test suite that will tell you whether or not your plugin works with a CO supporting the same version, right?
Gotcha.
So that's what we desire, but how do we guarantee that? We have to test it, which means we have to be able to run test automation against our test suite to make sure that it works with some plugin, and I think that's where the mock plugin comes in.
Well, you encountered the same issue I did, and what I ended up doing was just hard coding it to mock for the time being, because like you said, I have to know when something gets created and I need to validate the ID, I have to know what ID, for example, to expect.
So I think let's carry on with Luis's request. So essentially we've got something that takes the controller plugin through a happy path, and that's one block of this test. And then we've got something after, and this just goes all through, getting volume info and calling lists and all that other stuff. And it has some limitations, like we don't test pagination at all, that kind of thing. And then after that, somewhere in here, there's a set of node tests. I'm sorry, I'm just scrolling aimlessly up and down. There's a set of node tests that will run through that same controller happy path to create a real volume on some supposed real plugin, and then go do the node things, right? Node publish. And at least in the Docker plugin version of this test suite, we then go and do some basic file read write testing. If it's a if it's a shared file system mount, you ought to be able to like write a file and read back in and see that you got the same stuff that you wrote, and you ought to be able to, that kind of stuff.
Why do you want to do that? That's not CSI, is it?
Well, it's a way of validating that it is kind of CSI. I mean, CSI says, here's the mount point. And if you're claiming to mount a shared file system and we give you a mount point and you don't do a mount, then you haven't really lived up to your end of the bargain.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I put that into our goals with a big old question mark because I'm not sure it's actually important.
Okay.
That might, so that's kind of, I see that as a maybe nice to have and maybe not even nice to have, but it's a way of making sure that your plugin that's supposedly mounting stuff actually mounted stuff and it's actually usable. So we have that, and then we have our version of mock is it doesn't quite do a mock. It does a local file system. It's sort of similar to what Andrew was talking about, only we use symlinks instead of bind mounts.
Well, that won't show up in the mount table if you're searching to verify something's mounted.
Yeah, that's true, which we didn't ever do in our test suite. So
I thought that's what Luis was just saying that you did do. You're only validating that if you're only validating that a file path exists, the spec says that it's on the CO to create the file path, the target path. So the target path is going to exist prior to node publish ever being called, or it's supposed to be according to the spec. We had that same conversation internally. Docker used to expect us to create the path, but the spec says the CO is responsible for creating the target path.
Okay, but let's find out.
I think that's a totally fair criticism.
No, I'm not trying to criticize. I'm bringing it up. But when Luis was talking about the validation, I thought he was valid. I thought you meant you were validating that it appears in the mount table, because you can't validate the file path exists because that wasn't something you created.
So we don't do that. We just write some files and read some files, and then if it's supposed to be a read-only mount, we validate that we can't write files.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, that makes sense.
So that's, I mean, we're coming from a place that Cloud Foundry doesn't support block, so our wheelhouse is all about shared file systems.
Gotcha.
So that's kind of important to us, as we think about our workflow inside Cloud Foundry. The shared file systems actually acting like file systems is fairly critical. Never
mind.
Okay. So anyway, this is we have a couple different repos for our controller and node plugins for this local disk thing, and it just kind of carves out part of the local file system and pretends that it's a volume. I don't think we need to get into this unless you guys really want to see it. So this is a possibility for a mock. It doesn't have a ton of dependencies, but we do kind of
You said you do use symlinks instead of mounts, though, right? Or instead of bind mounts for this.
Yeah. So
okay, that could be good for Travis, because Travis container builds would accept symlinks, but they wouldn't accept bind mounts. But I think that ultimately we do need something that, my mock doesn't put anything in the mount table. Our VFS driver does. Ultimately, I do think we probably want something in the mount table, because even with the shared file systems like NFS or iSCSI, they're going to show up in what we search for as proc self mount info. That enables you to trace a bind mount back to the thing that you mounted it to. Just typing the mount command doesn't allow you to do that, but there is a.
Yeah, I think to Luis's point, it's not clear that we need to get.
Yeah.
Do we actually need a test for that? Right.
Well, so if you're trying to validate that somebody actually did something independently of the plugin, then that's the only way to test that thing is mounted to the target path you gave it.
So this is just want to let you know that there is a host path driver, a Kubernetes CSI, that does a lot of stuff. So it creates a. I may use mount path. I don't know, mount bind. But I just wanted to to understand your work. and thank you for showing it. And I think we're getting to a union of the same frameworks, the same styles, so that's good.
Do you mind if I show the two things,
Yeah.
or you want to show yours, Luis? Or?
No, you go. Go ahead.
Let me see if I can share. How do I do
Yeah,
this?
you totally can if you just share your screen, and then it'll allow you to pick an app.
Sure, I'm just trying to figure out how to share my screen. Where do
I think you're still sharing, so you may want to stop sharing.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I can't share what it says. Yeah. No worries. All right, so I'm going to share Safari, I guess. There we go. Share screen. Okay, y'all can see?
Yeah.
All right. All right, so let me do Go CSI. So y'all heard of that. So there, we do two things. Under testing, we've got we also use Jinko, or however you pronounce it, right? And we've got 3 test suites. We've got the controller test, the node test, and identity test. I can, let me do a Travis build. That will probably actually be the easiest way to show the output. So we show our test.
I'm not sure. Guys, before my dog starts barking. 1 second.
I'll go ahead and get something else up. What was it? Oh. Okay, you back, Luis? Okay.
Yep.
So this shows this happens with every build of Go CSI. It starts the mock server, and it runs 28 of the 33 test phases, and then it skips 5 of them because all of these are run with etcd as the lock provider for distributed locks, and then it runs 5 idempotent tests against create because we do up to 100,000 concurrent operations, and that kills etcd with 1 node. It doesn't. I was like, why is this slowing down? And then I went to etcd's performance README, and they were only listing 1,000 concurrent operations per node. I'm like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be doing 100,000 at once. So yeah, it's strictly tied to mock. I mean, you can see here, and I'm going to be doing the scrolling thing, right? Where I know exactly what the ID that mock is going to produce, and it's not validating anything on the file system because mock doesn't write anything to the file system. It doesn't modify the mount table. So it's pretty straightforward. You can run it locally by just doing a, let me stop share real quick and then just say share screen again. You can run it locally pretty easily with just a Genco testing and that, or make test or whatever, and that just runs all the tests, and you're just seeing all the debug logs. So I need to eliminate some of those, but I may not do the V. Anyway, so it's really easy to run locally, but again, it's sort of self-contained. What is that? Panic. I'm on a test branch I was working on. So anyway, let me close this and show you the Safari again. So I'm on so it's very contained is what I was saying. It doesn't currently allow you to test external drivers. So I really do like that about Julian's. That's, you hit upon the exact issue I ran into. Like, how do you determine what that payload is for create, and not just that, but what is the expected return value? Because you want to do things like assert the ID if you're able to do that. So
right.
That was going to be sort of a next step. Now, I like yours, but where I think where some value could be added is this thing called CSI VFS. So it does write to the file system, and if you go look in service node, I don't know why it's taking so long to load. It uses a package we created called GoFSUtil, and when it detects if something is mounted, for example, it first looks to see if that path even exists, and then it gets the entire mount table, and it is able to track bind mounts back to the original device or file to which they belong. And so it does the whole chain. Like the CSI VFS is built to do a private mount directory because this was written at the time before G mentioned that we don't want to support multiple workloads on the same volume on the same host unless it's a multi-volume. So we did a private mount path so that it did support that, and I just haven't removed it because I'm going to argue to provide that functionality eventually once there's a way to a CO to identify the workload. But the nice thing about this is, let's say it does a node publish, Julian, you could then go use something like GoFS util or just do it manually. It's like, does not just the file path exist, but does that entry in the mount table map back to the original device? And the way it works, what it actually all maps back to is, let me see if there's a good example of it. I don't think it's on my local file system, but it just tries to create a directory called .csi vfs, and it has a subdirectory for volumes, devices, and mounts. So it creates a file for a volume. So when you create a new volume with CSI VFS, it just creates a file in that directory with that name, that volume name or ID. And then when you attach it, in quotes, what it does is it bind mounts the volume into the device directory. And then when you mount it, it bind mounts the device into the mount directory, the private mount directory, and then finally into the target path. So what you end up with is a real file on the file system, and then a bind mount to a device, a bind mount to a private path, and then a bind mount to the target. The nice thing about this is it really does allow you to check do the same checks you would against an actual SP. So, we use this for a lot of our tests. The reason it's not part of GoCSI is, again, because GoCSI can be so busy that I know from Rexray, which does require VMs to build because some of its tests, trying to enqueue into the VM build queue for Travis, getting their sudo infrastructure can take forever. So we just do mock. But, before we do any type of release, we run it through VFS as well. Just mainly smoke tests. But I would love, and I've actually used yours against this, Julian, and it works because I had to figure out the whole payload thing. I'm like, oh, that's nice because that was the same issue that I encountered.
Yeah, that's good to hear because that was one of our to-dos for CSI was to take our cert suite and run other people's drivers against it, and so we got distracted.
No,
I didn't get to that yet, but that's great to hear that cross-pollination actually works.
It does. Yeah, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, by the way, so you can.
So,
by the way, you mentioned something. Sorry to tag this on about verifying multiple versions. I think that's an important thing to put on the document. I had a conversation with my colleague Travis the other day. That's going to be kind of difficult to support multiple versions because of the way Go does things. And I don't know if it's going to be a best attempt at supporting multiple versions or just saying we don't support a version, because we can always call the get supported versions, but I think that's going to be the best thing we can do. It's not going to be able to be a best attempt to, it's either going to be all or nothing. You either support, I don't think there's going to be a lot of opportunity for backward compatibility. For example, some of the changes they're making in 0.2.0, if you had a 0.2.0 client, you couldn't be backwards compatible with a 0.1 server because of the changes they're making to the actual API model.
Yeah, I think that'll become more pertinent once backward compatibility becomes a thing.
Okay.
But I mean, I guess the way I envision that working is if you've got a plugin that's claiming support for 1.1 and 1.2, then you could just go fetch the cert suites from 1.1 and run them, and you could fetch the cert suites from 1.2 and run them, and they should both pass, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm actually kind of curious if someone does that. I think they're just going to end up writing middleware that parses messages manually and doesn't marshal anything into objects.
Yeah, it might be easier in a language like Ruby, which is a little bit less sticky, which is a little bit more loosey-goosey. But I think before we get into the details on anything, I want to see what Luis
Sure.
has.
So, thank you. First thing, it was that our goal was a little bit different. Working as part of the Kubernetes CSI team, we needed a model to test all the drivers in the drivers repo in Kubernetes at CSI. So our model from the beginning was, how is it that we can create a simple, it was just a little better than unit test. That's what we wanted. We wanted a little bit better than unit test to make sure that the drivers were doing the right thing. We didn't want to go further than that to say, well, we wanted to make sure that it's mounting and doing everything. We just wanted to make sure that the API is okay. So that was our main goal. And at the same time, our architectural goal was that we wanted to make sure that it was could be included, the whole suite could be included in the Golang test suite as your driver. So you can just vendor package the suite and include it in your unit test and then run. And the second one is that as an application, you can run against an endpoint. It doesn't care what the endpoint is. It's just as long as a CSI endpoint. It could be a TCP one or a Unix domain socket. So that was our main goals. So let me share my screen. And ours is going to be pretty quick. So here I have my screen. You can see it.
Yep.
Okay, so one of the things I do, and I needed a way to verify my work. So what I do is let me just show you a hack. I set up a, where is it? Here, the mock driver from GoCSI. I bring it up. I set the CSI endpoint for it, and it listens on that point. And then I run my sanity test against it. And again, you can see it's an application with an endpoint. Now, I hear your concern about parameters for create. That's something that we can add either by a file, like a JSON file, or we can have it included in the API itself when it gets called. But just the simplicity of the usability of the project was that we wanted to be both a command line program to an endpoint and a call. So let me show you now. This is the code of CSI itself. I'm not going to go through it. But here's a model of how it's being used in Portworx now to test our Portworx driver. So what we do here is we go to CSI, and we go here to, I think it's CSI test. I put it in here. Oh, CSI sanity test. There we go. So all this does is vendor in the work for sanity, and then just start. It runs the entire suite just by pulling and vendoring it in. That was another goal. So that works there, and then in the drivers, we have one here for testing the host path. It pulls in the actual build of CSI Insanity, and then see, you can do skip like Ginkgo stuff, but you can we run it against the CSI, the host path driver. So that's the way we plan to use it, and we try to keep it as minimal as possible. It's just enough to say, yeah, it passes all the smoke tests. When an API makes a request, this is supposed to be the answer. That's all we wanted to do.
Right.
Yeah, I find it interesting. Both of you guys wrote the sanity tests for, any driver in Go. When I was thinking of doing what you two were doing, I was just going to use something like CSC and drive that via a script. And I guess the benefit is yours will run potentially on any host, although I wonder if it's tested for Windows. But just as script,
it doesn't really matter, because in Windows you can run Windows Linux world or.
I know. I'm talking more about whether using sockets or TCP. I find it interesting. The spec specifically calls out sockets, and when I brought up TCP, they said, "Oh, we're not doing Windows yet." But it seems most of us still do consider both when we do what we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, from a technical point of view, it doesn't really matter. It's just messages.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
I'm saying that's not the feedback I've received.
Oh, okay. Well,
and I find it interesting that we all did it anyway. That's why.
Yeah, I'm gonna stop sharing.
Company.
Yeah. So again, my goal, or at least not my goal for CSI test was keep it simple. right?
Uh-huh. Yeah, and I think that's a laudable goal.
But simple doesn't always mean complete. And you know that.
And I agree.
Well, and I think we maybe don't want to necessarily shoot for complete, and because I think there's a bunch of negative test cases that that could cause real problems for somebody, and just cause them to have to do a lot of work.
But see,
So
we do that with mock, and I think that's also important. And I think you're talking about like invalid arguments, you know, invalid input. And I want to make sure that the SPs return the expected error codes, because I also agree with you that this situation is rife for completely screwing over somebody's storage platform because of the type of negative tests I think are necessary. You don't want to find those out later. You want to validate that it behaves correctly, even if you send it bad input.
So let me give you a proposal. I would like to start with baby steps, right? You know, like crawl, whatever it's called, run, walk, run style. So whatever we pick from the three of us, and whatever model it is, whatever it is, we should start small and let the community start using and start getting accustomed to it, and then we'll start going through then the walk model, which is we start pulling more information, right? Having more negative tests and so on, and we start maturing together. I just think that if we start pulling immediately, going to a certain step, it's going to it's going to be a shock to the community, especially to the storage people that don't really understand this.
Well, yeah, and I think the other wrinkle, the other wrinkle for this that I would add is, you know, just to essentially agree with you, is that, you know, one of my goals for this set of tests is that when the spec gets updated, the tests should get updated in lockstep, and a PR that doesn't include the updates to the tests and whatever mock driver we put in should fail. It should fail CI, and then we shouldn't pull it until the updates are made to the test. So that means that we kind of have to be a little bit conservative about the amount of code that we pull in as a test suite.
I mean, then I don't think that's a full set. Again, I'm afraid of people creating SPs that are invalid. That might work most of the time, but fail part of the time, and they come back and point to a sanity suite that was incomplete.
Wait, hold on. I definitely want to address that, because I think it's a great point. I don't think it's for us to be responsible for that.
But that's what we're marketing. That's what I thought you were trying to position this as. This is a valid SP, and no, it's not. So I don't want to put a stamp on anything that marks something as valid.
I don't want to. I definitely want to have a warning and says we are not responsible for that. What I want to do is I want to help SPs test their code, but it's only a step until they get to deploy it on the actual Kubernetes that they want to test it with. Like, it is not our responsibility to say that your containerized storage system will work across OpenShift, CoreOS, and EKS and whatever. Like, it's not our responsibility to do that.
No, it's not. But if our sanity test doesn't actually verify their SP is compatible with the spec, fully, and we say that this validates the SP as a valid CSI SP, and something fails because of a missing test, then I think that is our problem.
What I just want to say is that is okay. We just say, look, this is like I said, baby steps. You find an issue like that, you send a PR, and we'll talk about it and we'll fix it. I just want to make sure that.
But I'm talking about what Julian just said, which was we need to keep the amount of code minimal, and I'm saying that might end up making this two different things: a minimal set of tests that don't have to get a large amount of updates for changes to the spec, and then a CSI SP sanity tool, because I don't think that one can be minimal.
Okay, so then this is what I'd like to suggest. There is an API only tool, right, that tests the API interface, right? Doesn't care about the mounting and stuff like that. And then there is a more of a strong verification tool that does more what you guys are mentioning, which is let's make sure.
And I guess what I would say about that second tool is maybe that doesn't belong in the spec repo.
I wasn't even bringing that up.
Maybe we don't. Well, I'm
talking about negative tests, validating error codes, and other things like that.
Well, Right, but as we move from one version to another, what I guess I'm proposing is like anything we put in the tip needs to come with updates to the tests that are in the same
Absolutely.
repo. So
Yeah, I
like
agree.
but we don't necessarily want a comprehensive test suite that we're maintaining at that level of granularity. Like if we're going to have a totally comprehensive test suite that says, hey, yes, your plugin is like,
That's fine. I'm saying
we
though
beat
that
the crap out of it and it looks like a valid
that
1.1 plugin, then maybe that can live outside in a place where it only has to get updated once every major version or something.
and that's fine. I'm just saying that you can't have it both ways. You can't say this is the validation sanity test for everybody and also want to keep things minimal. And I can give you a really good example. I didn't catch that G changed the error codes for pending operations from failed precondition to pending. But my tests caught it when I updated it, and that was a negative test. And so there are cases where people are making those changes. And I think it's valid no, because that's important. That's an important error code, and a CO might behave incorrectly
Agreed.
if they were checking the error code.
And I agree, and that's it.
And that's a negative test. I'm saying you can't have a complete test that's a sanity test for an external SP, and it can't be the same as something that you want to keep minimal to make changes minimal.
Wait, hold on. I just want to make sure what I mean by minimal is that we're only testing the API interface.
That's fine. That still includes negative tests.
I didn't say it didn't. What
Okay.
I'm trying to say is that should be its limit.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that's fine. The out-of-band file system tests are just a nice to have.
Yeah.
But yeah, something that
Right, and I guess I would say, like, it's not that we should have no negative tests, because I think that would leave us with a very simple test harness.
Yes.
But I think we need to be conservative about the number of negative tests and the nature of the negative tests we put in.
Sure.
Like, we don't necessarily need to hammer the thing with 1,000.
No, not at all. But like
checking
checking field sizes, like that was just a verifying that the middleware that I wrote was correct. This wouldn't be testing middleware. I was validating that the middleware was actually doing the locking correctly, both in memory and with etcd. But for example, I've got a half dozen tests that verify things like the get plugin info is sending back a reverse domain name notation, field sizes. That's middleware added recently to the. If you want to go look and go CSI middleware spec validator, it's middleware that can run both on the client and the server. But it validates things like field sizes. The maps cannot be non-nil and empty. Certain things can be marked as required. That's the type of negative test, so that I know that if I send this empty, I'm getting an invalid argument. If I send something that's 129 bytes for a string, I'm getting invalid argument because of failed size limit, failed precondition, things like that. The things that are specifically marked in expected error codes and expected behavior. I have tests for those because I think that's important.
Yeah, and so let me try to propose something then. I think, one, we all agree that Ginkgo is the model of the framework, right?
Yeah, I do, and I was going to ask you a question about that. Are you guys spinning up a new SP for every test case in Ginkgo, or do you spin it up at the very beginning?
Well,
we spin it up at the externally, right? So essentially, and I think Luis's tests work the same way.
We spin it up every test case so that it can be clean.
It's a separate. This is a tool that talks to an existing storage system.
I get that, and I'm saying mine isn't it. So in those 100,000, that's the one difference. I specifically do that against a single one, but other than that, it spins up a new environment unless I tell it that these should operate. There's some cases where I don't, but for the most part, it's an individual test case against a new system each time so that it's clean.
Okay, so Ginkgo is the framework. 2, I think that you've done a great job with the mock driver. I really do. And I think the mock driver could be used as the model to verify this tool.
I also think that, if we're going to agree Ginkgo is the framework, the point of Ginkgo is that you're supposed to have a clean environment for every test case. So I'm a little hesitant to say spin something up externally for that reason.
But it's just not practical for
not for an external system, you're right, but for validation of the spec.
but that's where this comes back to goals. So my goal for this test framework is somebody ought to be able to bring their own plugin running however it runs, and run it against this test suite and see if it seems to match.
I just don't agree that it can be the same test suite if one is comprehensive and one is not.
Yeah, so we're maybe not shooting for a comprehensive test suite, but it's not. So in our tests, I don't know actually if the CSI ones work this way, but we actually put in a specific check in our code to make sure that Ginkgo parallel nodes is 1, because we want to make sure you're not running your Ginkgo test in parallel, because
we run ours in parallel, completely randomized.
Yeah.
To make sure that
Again, but that's not really practical if like you've only got one kind of fixture to tell it how to create something. And it's going to try and create the same thing each time. So it has to run.
But depending on how you write your tests, I mean, you could write a fixture that does a particular workflow, so it's guaranteed. But it's operating. I believe testing should be more like production, right?
Hold on.
Can't know that things aren't going to happen in parallel in production.
I'm suggesting not to take the step where we are confirming that your driver is ready.
Sure. So that's this anti-goal. Certification is an anti-goal.
But that's what I keep hearing from you, Julian, that you want it to be the same thing that people could run.
No. It's just that it runs to test the API of an existing or storage system, like the way they deploy it. So the storage vendor sets up their iSCSI or their NetApp machine or whatever, and they have a CSI driver for it. That CSI driver is running, talking to this storage system. It's up and ready, and we then, as a storage user, a storage developer, I would then take this tool and just say, I just want to make sure my APIs are okay, right? And then I run the tool against it, and I get a result, and that's it.
It doesn't do a complete test of the API.
It does a complete test enough to make sure
that is an oxymoron. That's complete enough. That's an oxymoron. You can't complete enough. It's complete or not complete.
It's the way it's going to be.
You're talking sufficient, good enough for government work.
It's good enough. Yes, that's what I'm saying. Because they from there are going to take it to the next step and then test it on a real system, like with maybe OpenShift, right? And then they're going to test it with that, or they're going to test it with Tectonic.
But I want to help developers know that their SP that they're developing is fully compliant with the CSI specification. And this tool that you're describing won't do that.
That's right. And I think that's a goal for a year from now.
But you at the beginning of the call said you want to help people develop SPs. And I don't think that this tool is going to do that if they have an
I guess I disagree, only because we got an extremely similar test suite that we use in the Cloud Foundry context with Docker storage plugins, and it's super helpful. Yeah, and it is not our final round of testing. We have full integration tests against Cloud Foundry.
That's right.
For every storage plugin we make. But the first thing we do after units is we go to the certification tool, which allows us to just run in a lightweight environment, that doesn't require like a full container orchestrator.
I just want it to be a test in the pipeline of testing. I don't want to be the test. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I just don't think the A test, the way you're describing it, can omit all the negative tests.
I never said it omits negative tests. I just want to make sure.
I hear you, but I'm saying that I'm getting mixed responses from you and Julian. I think that Julian mentioned that he doesn't want to potentially script somebody's environment, but I think that it needs to be, that possibility has to be open if their SP doesn't properly gate against invalid arguments.
Well, totally. We're not going to guarantee that we don't script your environment, but I think, because there's no way to guarantee that. Like your storage plugin might be totally, just calling create might trash your kernel, but
I think we're on the same page, because I think you're saying the same thing. If we send this request to your driver, it should return the following return code. That's a negative test, right? And if we do that, I completely agree with that. I just want to make sure that we don't start going into the machines and look at the mounts, sending writes. That's a different test to me. I think this should be to say, I'm pointing to my CSI driver. It controls my entire storage system. Could be massive. I ask it to create a volume, I ask it to delete the volume, I ask it to create a volume with invalid arguments, it says no, things like that. That's it. You see what I'm saying? Like, just a simple API test to make sure it's working.
Yeah, and the only reason I raised those points is because earlier on I was told keep it minimal, no negative tests. And those are negative tests. And I would argue.
I think maybe that was just me misspeaking.
Yeah.
I
think all those are required. So.
No.
So. Yeah. Well, so there's a bunch of stuff you could test that, like, maybe, like, is it really the responsibility of the storage plugin to puke if you give it a payload that's more than what we say the maximum payload is?
That's what the spec says. So yes, it is. And
well, so I would say no, it's totally not, right? Like, so that's the CO behaving badly. When we put that kind of thing into the spec, we're trying to say this is what we deem to be good behavior on the part of the CO, and the SP has a reasonable expectation that this field isn't going to be more than this size.
Well, I don't.
But that doesn't mean that
that
every storage plugin has to have a layer of validation code to make sure that the CO isn't misbehaving.
Well, no,
right?
and that's why our middleware can be enabled and disabled via environment variables. But I think that again, we're talking about helping a developer create an SP, these test cases where it can check for something, because let's talk about creating a volume. Is it the responsibility of an SP to check these things? Let's say we're talking about creating a volume and a volume already exists. We're talking about these error codes that we're discussing, these anti-cases, right? These are behaviors that aren't built into the API. They're conditions that somebody has to create or write their SP to validate, to check for. And so if their SP isn't written correctly to validate that this thing already exists, that it should return an idempotent response, or it already exists and it doesn't match, for example, the capacity range, so it should return out of range, those types of behaviors. That's codified in the spec as expected behavior, but the API model that we're trying to validate, that doesn't validate that behavior unless we set up those conditions.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe it's important to set up those conditions to help an SP developer know that, oh crap, they forgot to make their create call idempotent, or they forgot to check for capacity range to say that this thing isn't idempotent.
So we only have 7 minutes left, and I have a hard stop at 7 minutes.
Yeah, me too.
I don't know if we've come up with any solutions, but at least.
So let me propose something, and you guys can tell me if you disagree. So I guess what I would propose is, given that the nature of what we said we think we're looking for, and if we start with Luis's sanity tests, and then we could fold in whatever, like the fixture pieces from our tests into that, and maybe we can do a review and make sure that we feel like there aren't useful test cases we're leaving on the floor. And then we use Andrew's mock driver.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And start with that as our starting point, and then we can have lots of arguments about what else should go in there later.
I think that's a great foundation. And then from there we can, this is just like barely the baby step. We just want to make sure that it's a growing thing, right? It's maturing. So
yeah, yes and no. I mean, it has to be somewhat mature at the beginning. Like, right, where we're putting this thing out there as whether you want to say so or not, as this is the thing that lives in the official spec repo that can be used to help validate SP. So
I don't agree with that at all.
So the framework that we were, the kind of basic expectation that Saad and G and I all talked about was that we would essentially we would pitch in our first best effort right now, along with this huge disclaimer saying we're not even going to guarantee that this thing runs. And then sometime around 0.2, we hope to harden it to the point where we say, yes, this is in lockstep with the spec.
I
just want to make sure you know that we use it already for multiple drivers, the sanity test. But I just want to point out something. I do want to make it available as soon as possible. And with the disclaimer that this is a community project and we welcome PRs for anyone, right? And we want to make it completely open, available ASAP for people to try out. Say it could die, it could be ready, and let us know, and we welcome patches. I think that's the way.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
I think Andrew, sorry, I've been distracted for a little bit. But Andrew, I think I agree with you that eventually we're going to get to the point where we validate everything that we say in the spec. But I'm also thinking that we should making incremental steps towards that goal. I don't think like initially making everything ready is kind of realistic. I think I would rather prefer an approach like it's incremental. I have something in the repo first. Don't say it's going to be complete and then gradually making that complete in the end.
Okay, well, the issue I have with that is what we have is pretty complete with regards to the spec. So it would be going backwards for us, so we wouldn't probably use it. And I want to, if we have the basis for something that can be more complete than what we're discussing, then maybe, man,
I think the main worry I have, like, I don't want like to commit a lot of code that like probably like people will like omit something in those code or doing something that you don't notice initially. Like I'd rather like you maybe like for every single functionality you want to verify, send a separate PR for that, have enough eye on those PR and code, and then get those committed later.
Well, now we do multiple PRs.
I think that's the kind of the expectation. We're going to put in a small starting point, and we're going to have a whole bunch of PRs. We're going to argue about each one.
Yeah, exactly. So let's just try to make it completely open. Start with the first step.
I think we should start with the Jinko skeleton. I don't think we should start with any existing code. I mean, Jinko is easy enough, and just
I don't agree with that.
Okay, well, I do, because I think it's the best way to not start with a bunch of code. We just said let's not have a bunch of one massive commit. So if we have a skeleton that encompasses the tests, and then we fill it out.
Wait, let's not get too much in the details of things of the conversation we're having.
All the details that y'all are concerned with are the ones I disagree with.
Well, we're saying that we need a foundation, and the foundation that CSI Sanity does is that it points to a driver, and it is quite minimal at the moment, where it tests, and it does negative tests too, of the API, right? Okay. And I think it uses the mock driver to verify itself, and I think it's a good foundation to continue from there. And Andrew, I welcome your changes. And as if you feel it needs to be even more negative, we'll talk about it. We can also make it, in Ginkgo, a person can skip, we say, just skip all these are marked, whatever, right? So it just makes it all in a central point. It just gives a place for starting up, where we can stand on, that's all. But if we stand on nothing, it's going to take forever. Okay? We're already using it in the other ones, like I said.
I know, and other people are using other things as well that may be more.
I mean, the community.
I don't know why okay.
But I think ultimately you're not saying stuff that's that different, right? Like if we start with CSI Sanity, Andrew, I mean, your tests are more complete, but they're also complete running explicitly against your mock driver with a bunch of expectations. Yeah. So those have to be refactored to work against an arbitrary plugin anyway. So that work has to happen. So that can happen in the form of a PR. So I guess it feels like, and if we make them granular enough, then we can have more granular arguments about what is and isn't warranted.
So let's go with that for now.
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Okay.
All right, guys, I got to go. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
Thank you, guys. Thank you very much.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks, Julian, for doing this.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.